Hey, how's it going, guys? Um, I'll tell you what, these Butler systems are the best. And I just have to say that I ran into an issue today that, and I'm categorizing it here in the video so I can help remind myself what I ran across in the event that some of you guys have some other issues. But what was happening was a 2008 has a Butler Fusion Relay Center here. It's because it's fly-by-wire. And what was happening was when the machine system engage switch, and I pulled it out just as a test because I don't have anymore, but the system engage switch on this young man's truck, even with everything powered off, the key off, the system would engage. It would just engage. And so after my troubleshooting that I spent an hour, at least an hour, troubleshooting, replacing fuses, looking at switches, I replaced a switch like this one here I took out. There was just no help. And it was a head scratcher. So I got a hold of the team at Butler, and I burned up their phone line for over 99 minutes. So it was a long time I spent with these guys, the team at Butler. And in 3 years, they told me that they had never run across the issue that this truck was having, let alone be able to just pinpoint it with a few questions. And so they worked with me for over an hour, 99 plus minutes on the phone with them today. And come to find out, after everything was said and done, that this 20 amp fuse right here, and if you look inside this little tray, that 20 amp fuse is the accessory plug switch, 20 amp. That little 20 amp fuse right there. And it operates this switch, and operates the cigarette lighter. Matter of fact, obviously, that has to be on in order for the cigarette lighter to work. Auto pump out in some of your trucks. 12-volt electrical outlets. So there's a short in here, down below, and the wire comes underneath this rubber mat and then inside here. And so, OMG, what a cluster. It was unbelievable how much I went through. I mean, I went through pulling the ground wires off of the body, the inside fender well on the driver's side in the engine compartment. I pulled the alternator plug. Now this is all recommendations from Butler. We're trying to go back and find out where the feed is coming through for the short. And so we narrowed it down to this 12-volt auxiliary, and once that fuse was pulled out, the machine acted normal. It would turn on with the system engage switch. It would turn off, and everything worked fine after that. But that took me, oh my gosh. A young man got here at 12:30. We spoke for half hour, 40 minutes, just about life in general and business, and then I jumped into it, starting my troubleshooting. Now, he came in, and I originally intended on replacing his front drive clutch, because he was saying as he's going down the road, originally he said as he's going down the road that the truck would engage at whatever speed he was driving. All of a sudden, the Butler would fire on, And so there's a little bit of misinformation I was getting from him, and that's why it's important, so important, that when you're asking for advice and help from either me or Mark Sager or any of the other Butler gurus that are on my page, that you give us as much information as to, what year it is, how many hours it is on the panel, and if there's any electrical issues that you would run across, any symptoms that you're having. That's imagine imagine you're in the doctor's office and you're talking to the doctor about some issue, and he's asking you what your symptoms are. Well, they're prying for information so they can give you the best answer, and that's what I ask. Give me as much information as possible. Well, there was a lot of misinformation that I got, and as I'm troubleshooting my way through this, being on the phone with Butler for over an hour and a half, as I'm troubleshooting my way through this, I find out that he had a radiator that and water pump. It started with the water pump just completely disintegrated, blew the back end off the water pump on his engine 6.0, and so that had to be replaced. In addition to the radiator had to be replaced, and so that all that work and service was done by a outside source. Obviously wasn't me. But that story just in itself, that the water pump had exploded, and the mechanic that he had work on it said he'd never seen one that did that. Well, so after I figured out that this fuse, with Butler's help, thank you, Butler. These guys were fantastic. They worked with me, and they just talked with me because I had an issue, and this is something I'd never seen and something they'd never seen. Once we determined that fuse that operates the 12-volt electrical outlets, I just pulled the fuse. Everything worked fine. I discussed with a customer that it could be to try to track down, because the wiring that comes from the panel, this main wire harness here feeds the panel, goes underneath the mat, and then back in over here. And you guys saw my picture a few weeks ago about me replacing the panel here, and so inside there is where the short is my assumption, and along with Butler's. But trying to find that is like finding a needle in a haystack. And so the machine is now at this point working with that 20 amp fuse completely pulled out and disregarded. Is that right? No, it's not right. And given enough time and money, I can fix it. However, I needed to get the truck to a point where I could actually go on and test that what my findings were true, and the Butler system would run. And hooray, it ran. After all that time I spent on the phone with Butler and working it out, got to a point where I could back the truck out of my shop and actually run it. And lo and behold, the other mechanic that he had do the radiator hoses, he did the radiator and the water pump. First of all, when I found that information out, I immediately started questioning whether the heat exchanger was completely full of antifreeze. But I didn't even get to that point. I didn't even get to the point to find out at this juncture, and I mean, I didn't even get there yet. I just wanted to make sure that I can start and stop the machine, and he could, go back home to the east side of Michigan over by Detroit, and I'm in Grand Rapids, so 2.5 hour drive. And so finally, when I was able to test it, well, right away, one of the one of the feed lines that feeds the heat exchanger up off the Butler Y. Now, Coach Reichbos, he had posted a video or a post about him replacing his radiator hoses, and right away one of those hoses had a slicing across the side, right behind the clamp that clamps it to the Butler Y, and it was spraying antifreeze all over the front belts and the clutch. And I'm standing next to the van and by the side door, and all of a sudden the machine is acting really weird, like the clutch is dragging or hanging up, and so I go up front, and sure enough, there's antifreeze spraying all over the front of the belts and everything. So that was something that wasn't on me, but because here it is, it's in my face, I had to fix it. So pulled the clamp off, I cut the hose back. It's here somewhere on my dirty bench. Yeah, here it is. This little hose had a little slice in it, and I cut that much off and reinserted it, put the clamp back on, and I thought, okay, we're good to go. And never mind the fact that at some point I was going to have to bleed the heat exchanger because I just didn't believe that the heat exchanger was full after they did all their radiator and water pump service. So we're back here, and I'm starting the machine again. Things seem to be working okay. I hit my speed control to ramp it up into high speed, and young man says, "Holy shit." He goes up to the front of the van, and another major radiator hose had blown and popped right off the Butler Y. And so that was a mess in my face. And when I got up there and pulled the mass airflow sensor and filter box off, I was able to see that hose had been mushroomed out so bad that there was just no way that clamp was going to hold it. But that threw another wrench in the works, because why is there so much back pressure? I mean, we're only talking about usually 6 to 8 pounds of pressure that should be running through that water pump and radiator system, from what I remember. All of a sudden, this hose blows off. So, and I explained to the young man that I didn't trust that hose, so I went and got one, and I replaced the hose. Both of them actually on both sides of that Y, the upper radiator hose. And then I bled the heat exchanger, so I made sure that is all done and thorough. And then away we go in my testing. So I've made, so we're talking about, he got here at 12:30 this afternoon, and he didn't leave here till 6:30, and I was on my game, man. I was prying at every possibility to get his truck up and running. And so as it turns out, I'm testing his machine, and his pulsation dampener was leaking water right down here. And he pulled the cap off, and I said, "Look at that leak." So he pulls a little rubber cap off, and this pulsation dampener, that C-clip that's up in there, and that retainer cap was pushed out. And I said, somebody froze this truck. Somebody froze the truck. So I described to him about, I have one of those, and let me put it on. And do you want me to fix it? So I just don't want to start replacing parts on people's trucks when they're responsible for paying. I don't want to just do that. But got his permission. He says, yeah, it has to be fixed. So I went to pull it off. Well, in doing so, the unloader has to come off. The van's running at this time. I had the water tank valve shut off, because when you pull that off and the water tank valve is open, it's just gonna be pushing water out of that lower nipple. And so the water tank valve is shut off. I start disassembling his pulsation dampener and the unloader is in my way in order to pull it all off. So I pop this disconnect, I pull the unloader out, and the van, as I said, the van's sitting there idling, and water just starts pouring out of this disconnect right here. For a minute it was water, maybe, a minute and a half. All of a sudden it turned to Dex Cool orange. And I says, oh my God, somebody froze this truck. And he looked at me like kind of dumbfounded, as if to say, well, I don't know how that could happen. I thought I winterized it. Excuse me. I said, somebody froze the truck. So, sure enough, he had some help from some aftermarket guy that runs Hydromaster direct drives, and he just bled windshield washer fluid up through here till he saw blue and thought that was good enough. Well, his heat exchangers popped. And another good indication, besides the fact that I had Dex Cool, I stuck my hand right underneath of it and smelled it. It's Dex Cool. And it's orange. So besides the fact of that alone, I said the heat exchanger's blown, and the overflow bottle on the radiator was filling up. It's unreal. So the whole point behind this post and video tonight, guys, is that, I'm in it for the long haul. If you guys have the time and you can be patient with me to figure things out. I don't know everything about these trucks, especially that 20 amp fuse going bad. There's something back here. There's something down here in the wiring harness that is shorted out and needs to be addressed at some point in that van's life. It's going to have to be addressed. But by pulling that fuse, he was able to at least get going. And but OMG, what a cluster it was. All right, and Butler also told me this is the hardest electrical troubleshooting problem that they've ever encountered in over 3 years. So leave it to me. Another Chips Butler service first. To end up having an issue like this. I got the young man up and running. However, he wasn't studious enough to be thorough and winterize and keep his Butler from freezing. And now he's got a big bill for replacing the heat exchanger, some other parts that I've already mentioned. His water filter's leaking like a sieve. But before he left, I told him, I says, drain your water tank, and then I'm going to hook up my antifreeze pump, and I'm going to actually pump antifreeze windshield washer fluid in through the entire system to try to save what he's got and salvage what he has so it doesn't get any worse. Michigan weather is fickle, and we don't know from one day to the next, no matter what the weatherman says, what kind of weather we're going to have. So another Chips Butler service first. I'm all over it, and it was a learning experience for me, and that's why I'm providing this video today. My shop is a mess, and it's just one of those things. So cheers, have a good evening. I'm gonna have a beer. So thank you guys for watching.